Bom dia, senhores e senhoras. É um prazer dar as boas-vindas para vocês para o evento de logística automotiva. É o 7º evento aqui em São Paulo, no Brasil. O meu nome é Christopher Ludwig, eu sou o editor do grupo. Isso inclui uma revista, A revista Veículos tem que ser também o nosso portfólio global de conferências, incluindo essa conferência, esse evento aqui no Brasil. Nós vamos ter um dia bastante movimentado, umas sessões, eventos de networking. Eu quero começar mostrando para vocês algumas coisas do nosso programa até chegar de noite, antes da gente dar início a essa sessão. Hoje de manhã nós vamos ter uma palestra que vai dar uma visão geral da indústria. Nós vamos ter de
from Chery, and Jansen Esteves, Global Supply Chain Director, South America for Delphi. You'll also get some introduction and context from me. Following this session, we'll have our usual coffee breaks, which this year are hosted by our gold sponsor, Jeffco. And then we'll have further sessions this morning. Session 2, we're joined by General Motors and Scania, along with some major 3PLs here in Brazil, Penske, BLG, and Jeffco. We'll have lunch this afternoon, which is hosted by our premier sponsor, Penske. And then in the afternoon, the format's going to shift a little bit. For the first time here, I think in Brazil, we're going to do a think tank session. So what will happen here is we'll break into some smaller groups focused on specific topics, each one moderated by an expert. There are details of that in your program about the different topics, whether it's LLPs, whether it's rail, whether it's finished vehicle logistics. And we'll also have a notice board which shows you the full range of topics. So you'll be free to choose the topic and that you want to be a part of. These tend to be, they're very interesting. You get a chance to sort of drill down into specific areas that interest you. They're offline, and we'll hopefully it's a good chance to get some good discussion. And then finally, in the afternoon, we'll have a Q&A with again with some major logistics decision makers here in Brazil. For example, again from Chery, from General Motors, Ford, and from Scania. So have some questions ready then, please, because we want it to be a lively Q&A. It might be a bit early to start talking about steaks and caipirinha, but I hope you're looking forward to this evening as well, when we'll have our gala dinner hosted again by our premier sponsor, Penske, at Figueira Rubaiyat, sorry for the pronunciation, where we'll have our dinner this evening. I also just wanted to point out something about this event. This event is streamed live with the Automotive Logistics Live service. I think we've done this once before in Brazil, but just to kind of remind you of it. There's a features where this video is streamed online, but if you sign in, you'll also have the opportunity to message your fellow delegates, to post comments and questions, and indeed to participate in some live survey that we'll be doing later on this session. Again, there's instructions on how to do that in your program. There's a website. There's a link on the website, which is bit.ly/ALSA live. We'll put some instructions up a bit later when we ask you to do this. But again, you can find that. You're going to log in simply using your email address and your registration number, which is actually on your badge. I think it starts 155. So what we've done is we've collected some questions from some of our sponsors and put a few questions together ourselves, and you're going to get a chance to vote on these. And just as a little sort of prompt or primer for what we're going to do, one of the questions we're going to put up now for you to see, and if you want to log in at any point during this session, log into the live service and put your answer, then we're going to show you the results, and then we'll have a series, I think about 6 or 7, that we'll do at the end of the session. So the question that we're going to start with, I think we're going to put up now, or maybe not, but so okay, we'll come back to that, no problem. Okay, now here it is. So again, how it's going to work. We'll have these questions. You're going to be able to vote live on the application, and we're going to display the results. So again, we'll keep this question open during the session, and you can come back to it at any time and vote, and we'll have more at the end. So as you know, the theme of our conference today is Adiante Juntos, so forward together. So we're kind of coming together in a spirit of collaboration here. So the first question is basically around collaboration. So supply chain stakeholders in Brazil or South America should collaborate mostly to exchange best practices and innovations across the industry, to find economies of scale in operations and purchasing, to establish industry-wide standards for logistics, to formulate lobby regulation and policy for automotive logistics, or you don't believe it is in your company's interest to collaborate. So this is the survey, the first question we're going to be putting to you. Again, question is going to be open. If you sign on to the service, you can put in your answer at any time, and we'll come back to this at the end with the other questions. It's just an interesting way to kind of take the pulse, to read the pulse of what people in the room are thinking. Okay, so before I kind of move into our first session, I'd just like to take this opportunity again to thank our sponsors who make this event possible. So we're very pleased again to welcome our premier sponsor, Penske Logistics, who's again hosting lunch and dinner this evening, and our gold sponsor, Jeffco, who'll be hosting the coffees. We also have 3 global sponsors who sponsor pretty much all of our events around the world, and those are CHEP, CTM Lore, and Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics. And finally, I'd also like to welcome our silver sponsors, Agility and BLG Logistics. So take some time to visit with their booths and stands and talk to them. They're here to share ideas and services with all of you. All right, so let's move on now to our first session. As I mentioned right in the beginning, this is our 7th conference here in Brazil. So that's kind of long enough to have been through some up and downs in South America. And to kind of have seen the different stages of the market. Obviously, when we first started this event in 2009, Brazil was kind of roaring out of the global financial recession much faster than most other markets, with quite strong growth, which took it into the top tier of vehicle production and sales globally. So we've dealt many years with the challenges of growth, including the fear of logistics blackouts and capacity issues across Brazil. We've talked about strikes and capacity issues in ports, we've talked about Custo Brazil and the specific challenges of managing the high costs and peculiarities specific to the Brazilian market. We've had security issues, theft issues, again, many different sort of things, confusion around policy, etc. We've come together at times of hope and promise, and also at times of some disappointment. So, I mean, I don't have to spend a lot of time today outlining the current context of the market. You know what's going on as well as anybody. Obviously, Brazil is struggling with high inflation, high interest rates. We've seen the currency come down quite a bit, and the economy and the budget, the government budget, hurt by the fall in commodity and oil prices. The IMF is calling for about a 3% GDP decline in Brazil this year, and a further 1% decline next year. If that happens, it's the first time since 1930, 1931 that Brazil has seen 2 consecutive years of GDP decline. Obviously, that's had a big impact on the automotive sector. We have sales down 20% following some declines last year, and even worse for heavy commercial vehicles. And the current forecasts aren't necessarily for a speedy recovery. So what does it mean for supply chain and logistics? So obviously a lot, as you know. Obviously lower volumes make it tough for all suppliers and providers. It reduces scale, increases the cost per shipments, and unless you make adjustments and respond. With the devalued currency, the total supply chain costs increase for imports and vehicles. And obviously we have long-term risks that technology investments are put off, and other improvements and productivity gains might be delayed. On the other hand, and I don't want to be sort of dismissive of the downturn, but these are challenges which are also opportunities for many of the people in this room here today. Obviously, the logistics specialists and engineers have the chance to redesign logistics flows and make response to the frequencies and pick up to make sure that they match the appropriate volume. Manufacturers perhaps are more open to new solutions to help save costs and improve their supply chain, to look to particularly to reduce fixed costs. Perhaps they're open to outsourcing things that hadn't been before, or new ideas. So again, this is opportunities for people even in a tough market. And obviously the change in currency also changes some dynamics. It puts much more focus on localization, which we know is important in Brazil. And for those companies that can respond to shift to exports, there are also opportunities on the export side. And I think another reason we come together today, even in difficult times, is to look to the future. And I think the future for Brazil and South America is still bright. There's 200 million people here, there's an aspiring middle class, and we don't think that that's going away. Then they will get their mojo back, so to speak. You just have to look at OEMs who continue to invest. We have Chery, who we'll hear from shortly, about their plans in Brazil. We have many other car makers, whether it's Audi or BMW, who have started production, and obviously major plants like the Fiat Chrysler plant that came online earlier this year in Pernambuco. There's also been delays or canceling of plans. We heard that Honda's delaying their plant opening in Brazil. So it is tough time, but even if the outlook isn't as high as it was before, the long-term perspective is still good. I'd also probably just want to point out that the wider South American market also has plenty of opportunity. We'll probably spend most of today talking about Brazil for obvious reasons, but if you look even to Argentina, we're looking at some potential political change in even a few weeks. Colombia is in the process of historic peace negotiations, which might see the end of strife there. And there's also some major infrastructure projects happening in places like Colombia. So South America is a region with considerable potential, to say the least. There's free trade agreements that are happening. I would point to the Pacific Alliance between Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. And of course, the huge Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes Chile, Peru, and Mexico among the 12 countries participating. Obviously, some of these are not happening with Brazil, but they do spell change in the region. And I do think more open, free, and transparent supply chains is a benefit for South America and a benefit for Brazil in the long term. So that's just perhaps what I would my state of the industry today in South America. The final point, again, is to come back to our theme. Adiante juntos. So working together, we're stronger. That's the reason why we have this conference. That's the reason why you guys have taken some time to be with us today, and we appreciate that. So let's take the time and opportunities that we have today to share some ideas. So I'd now like to invite our panelists. We'll have 2 presentations, and then we'll have some chance at the end for Q&A. So it now leaves me no further ado to introduce our first speaker, Orlando Moral from Chery, Brazil.
Bom dia. Ela falando. Bom dia a todos.
Good morning to everyone. The idea is to tell you a little bit about our experience. It's a new company, large company. We come from China. We came to Brazil with plans of establishing ourselves, of growing, and we have a clear business case of how this should work, what the goals are, the growth. But unfortunately, due to our situation here in Brazil, I'm going to share with you how this experience is panning out. Perhaps the only Chinese group that really has invested. And that's a little bit of what we want to tell you today. Well, I think everyone remembers this photograph. This photo here reflects the situation of Brazil when a lot of companies such as ours has decided to invest in a plant here in Brazil. At that time, the economical scenario was very, very favorable. Internal market was growing very consistently, had been growing for quite a few years. The dollar was 1.7, difficult to believe, in 2010, and the low dollar that made funding easier. The Selic tax was really at a very low level, and the Brazilian growth, which was sort of not so constant, but we were growing 7.5%. And so many Chinese companies of the automotive industry, all of these here, announced building manufacturing plants in Brazil. Now, after these years, the only one that really carried out and actually built a plant was Chery. No one else did anything industrial. So, what was Chery's project in Brazil? It was the first manufacturing plant out of China. China works a lot with CKD operations, but they decided to do in Brazil to build a complete plant and to produce vehicles. They invested $400 million, 1 million square meters in Jacareí, which is in the state of São Paulo, and the capacity to produce up to 150,000 vehicles in different phases, and also to generate 3,000 direct jobs up to 2018. This was the plan, and this was the trend if the economy had continued the fast development that we expected. Now, why Brazil? It's one of the countries with a quick economical development, one of the big markets in the world, and also a good relationship between China politically, in terms of government, etc. So here are some photos of our plant, and just to understand what Chery is. They have their plants are concentrated in China. They have 6 industrial plants complete in these towns here in China. Their headquarters is in Wuhu. It's a city near Shanghai, a little bit more in the interior. It's the biggest manufacturing company in China. They're very diversified. They make a big range of products. They have 13 plants outside China. The main markets are Iran, Indonesia, Vietnam. So in Latin America, Venezuela, Brazil, Uruguay, these are developing countries, and many of these countries with a good political relationship with China. So Brazil was the first manufacturing plant. It was a copy of a Chinese with everything, doing painting, the whole assembly line, absolutely everything. This is the manufacturing plant. It was inaugurated in 2012 with complete installations. And then what happened after all of this? When it was ready, we said, well, now let's start putting our plan in action. The market, it seems like a joke, but everything changed. So that huge growth that was taking place in the market dropped, and it continues dropping. That means we had a huge loss, and just in 2015, 15%, the real in relation to the dollar, I don't even have to mention it, 3.7, near 4 now, but there was a huge increase, 116%, and the Selic rate went up 64% up by 2015, and the economy that was with a growth of 7% when we decided to do this, now it's in a negative and continuing negatively next year, 2% more or less. So from all those Chinese companies that said they were going to do something in Brazil, the only one that did something in Brazil was in fact Chery. So in a scenario such as this, Chery had plans of a sort of a nationalizing process in Brazil. We're going to see this. But you can imagine the impact if you have 75% of imported components and the market changes drastically as it did. You can imagine the impact of this in the business. It's huge, and this is what's making us sort of hibernate for a period. The company has serious commitments of continuing. It's a state company in China. The only shareholder of Chery is the government of the province of Hanghui, where Wuhu is, and their plans are long term. They don't think of leaving Brazil. We had a visit of our world CEO recently. He reinforced all the plans that we should continue, but we have to lose less than what we're losing. We're having strong losses, big losses. So the idea is to take all the measures possible to be able to survive a few years until the situation improves, and with the plans that we're implementing here in Brazil, that we can be lucrative in a few years. So we have to be agile, we have to be creative, and we have to eliminate all the possible losses to survive in this mutating market. So what did we do? I'm going to show you Chery's logistics up to this year, the beginning of this year, and what we're changing in all this logistics concept. Chery and all the suppliers, because a lot of parts came straight from Chinese suppliers, and this would consolidate. They would send everything to Shanghai port, then everything was put in containers, and they would come to Brazil through the port of Vitória in Espírito Santo. Not only the cargo, but the cars. They would come from the Vitória port. They had some fiscal benefits, and we had about 25% of national components, which was then taken to the Salto uh, plant. We had three uh, industrial plants, the Jacareí plant that I showed you, and due to some uh, tax issues, we did a powertrain plant. It's for suppliers. It's near Chery, then in near Jacareí, in the Dom Pedro Highway, on the way to Campinas. And we also had the parts warehouse in the town of Salto. So then we have our dealers spread out in Brazil. So what did we do? We quickly developed 6 cases that we'd like to show you. The first case is about the Vitória port. We used to work where our inventory was not, the cars were not nationalized. We had a high inventory cost and a high warranty cost because the car was sort of far from the headquarters of the company. So we immediately transferred this to the port of Santos. Now the idea is not to pay storage, and we do the nationalization, and we immediately deliver it to the logistics company. There was a huge gain in terms of logistics and inventory costs, and there was also a very good warranty result. We implemented a PDI near the plant. Everything is checked to maintain the quality of the vehicles, and the costs, we managed to decrease them a lot. Some taxes that we increased, we're working hard to recover this. We also started having this tax recovery, especially the Brazilian VAT, which is called ICM. So there was a good gain in this logistics, whether it be inbound or outbound. The case number 2 is the Acteco plant. This powertrain plant was implemented to have some innovar gains and tax gains in general. In practice, after this situation, this was not an adequate strategy. Since we drastically reduced the volume in relation to what had been planned, we then decided to transfer this to the Jacareí plant. There was a large area there, so this was deactivated, and all the powertrain was transferred to Jacareí. So we had a big gain for rent. We had a good synergy in this port train with the transfer and absorption of the labor, and we had a big inventory because of outsourcing, and all this was reduced with the integration in the manufacturing plant of Jacareí. The third case that was implemented, I'm talking about things I've been there for 1 year and 1 month. All this was decided and done in 6 months, 8 months. We took all these decisions and we've already implemented them all. The third case was the introduction of the Chery production concept. There was a Chinese system. We adapted it to what we know here in Brazil. We implemented all the lean concepts that we have in team working, 5S, visual management, qualification training, standardized quality, methods to solve problems, CPM, standardized work, and environmental management. We put everything into a procedure and into standards where the whole company works like this. And this also gave us good productivity gain and less waste. The plant became much more lean and with a visual, a much better visual. Fourth case, the lean concept. We implemented two models ever since the plant started, and we had to come in with the KK third model, which is imported. This car is going to be produced here in Brazil as of November, and then we're going to have an SUV as from next year, will be the fourth line model, to allow for all these models using the same production line. We had to implement these lean concepts in the logistics area, so all the parts of markets, sequential routing, materials, frequency of supply with low volumes, occupying not too much space. All this has been planned. We've done the phase one, and we're developing phase two for a fourth model, which will start in middle of next year. This has also brought us a good gain, especially space-wise within our operation. And the fifth case is the nationalization process. Our nationalization level, as I told you, was about 30% when we introduced the model, and in 2 years we have plans to reach 70%. So we're going through a nationalization process of parts, port train, finishing, mechanics, suspension. The only thing that we have not nationalized yet, because the volume really does not justify this, is the part of is a part that still comes from China, and this plate part will be, the rest will be nationalized, except all this part of uh, steel sheets and plates. So there's no point in nationalizing this yet. We intend, when we have a critical mass, a minimum critical mass, we're going to implement another process. We hope to do this more or less in 1 year and a half when we have all this process concluded, and then we'll take over this logistics part and we'll do everything that we're all this milk run implementation. Last case, in spite of the crisis and the difficulties in Brazil, we're now introducing the supply pack. We had a huge area around the plant, so we made we had meetings with the Brazilian and Chinese banks, with the municipality, with the government. We had a legislation was generated, and we formed an industrial park in Jacareí. So there are a series of, there's land around there, so the idea is to build other companies, especially Chinese companies, that should install themselves in this new industrial park to produce parts that are used in our products. So this big area will, I hope, in the future be transformed into an industrial park.
With all these with all this implementation, we changed our industrial and logistics. Uh, we cut some things that demanded large volumes of money in rental. We simplified the Porto Vitoria all pieces and vehicles that we import from China come through the port of Santos. They're nationalized very quickly, and they're sent then to the Chery plant. From there, the same thing happens with the Brazilian producers or suppliers. The inventories are made inside the parks of Chery or our transportation company, and they go to the dealers of Chery. I try to simplify this a bit or largely so that I wouldn't extend myself too much in it. So what are the plans? We have plans in 2015 for the local production of Cellar and new QQ, the three models that I have talked about already. Uh, and we should work very strongly on our dealers network, and we intend to generate new jobs in the region of Vale do Paraíba. Um, in fact, for 2016-17, we have a plan, as I said, to produce locally an SUV. This is in advanced phase of development, and we intend to open a research and development center inside this industrial park that I told you about. In 2018, we are very optimistic still. We don't know what's going to happen. We hope to grow a lot, but it's all very uncertain, and we hope we can go back to our initial plans of reaching 3% of market share. This could happen in 2018 or even afterwards. But Chery should hibernate in the next year and a half, and then come back to the market when the market and the economy are better. We can come back strongly and come back to our original plan, which was the implementation of this project in Brazil. That's what I had to show you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The questions after the presentation. Okay, thank you very much, Orlando. I think that illustrates quite well what I sort of said in my introduction about need to adapt and to adjust the supply chain to the current circumstances and indeed some of the opportunities that come within that. We're going to have Q&A at the end, so you'll have a chance to pose some more questions to Orlando specific to any of that. Next, I'd like to invite up a major tier supplier globally and here in South America, Jansen Esteves from Delphi, South America.
Bom dia. Queria agradecer ao Automotive
Logistics, the Automotive Logistics, to be able to be here and share with you what we've been doing in the past few years. In line with what Orlando just showed you, we had a market that was projected for 5.5 million vehicles, and we'll end, if we're lucky, with 2.600. So it was a quite a reasonable loss. And my agenda I'd like to share with you is the view from the standpoint of supply chain, how we defined our strategy of purchasing strategies, how it acts in every region, and what do we see as a strategy for our suppliers in the region. And I'll show you also what explains all the difficulties of location difficulties and what happened to Brazil along the past 10 years. As you can see in this chart, Brazil used to be had superávit in exports in 2016, we had 2006, 2007, we had an inflection curve. Brazil started to grow the vehicles, but basic vehicles, and as we had the 1.0, the so-called 1.0 vehicles, Brazil had a local supply basis which was quite strong, and we managed to export then. As new technologies, the global platform definitions of the OEMs changed the places. Brazil lost competence in some O&Ms of defining global platforms, and this was inverted, and we started with a deficit in 2013. We imported we had a deficit of some $10 billion. What does that mean? It means that Brazil, as a supplier, we didn't manage to follow up the global technologies, and we ended up by importing all this material, and we did not develop our basic industry. With the Innovar, this changed, but this started in 2013. Until now, we haven't seen any results. And what happens here, as I'm going to show you in the next slide, is this. This is our industry, our market, the OEM market, that includes all the OEMs. This is based on 2013. We had $163 billion, and the market for the auto parts for $85 billion. The problem is both Tier 3 and Tier 2, they are some 300 companies, but represent only 25% of the billings. 75% of the billing of the auto parts industries are concentrated in Tier 1, which is Delphi and other companies that you already know, large multinational companies. With that, we put an end to this gap. We ended up with no competence to develop the Tier 3 and Tier 2 suppliers to meet demand. And when we talk about scale, as Orlando mentioned, the difficulty of locating, Brazil today has 21 OEMs in Brazil to produce 2.5 million cars. 21 OEMs. So the market is extremely fragmented and with terrible difficulties in location. So as Orlando mentioned, sometimes some categories you cannot import the electronic components, like in other categories that you don't manage to pay the tool kits to put it in Brazil, and we end up by paying a high price because it looked into the internal market. The partnerships that Brazil made with the South American countries didn't give us a good return or the necessary return. We were dependent upon the internal market, and Brazil ended up by suffering. All this brings complexity. The good news is that after all this crisis, opportunities come. Brazil still has a structure with companies and competences to start exporting, but we don't start exporting overnight. The export market conditions tell us that we'll reach that in 2-3 years' time. That's what Brazil has to do now, both meet the internal market needs and focus on exports. This was just to give you an idea of how our supply chain is in Brazil. I'm going to talk a little bit about Delphi and explain you how our strategies work for the supply chain. Delphi has 7 manufacturing plants in South America. These, I'll show you the products that we manufacture. We have one plant in Argentina where we manufacture radios and safety systems. Piracicaba, powertrain, focus on that. Cotia, the diesel part, and Paraisópolis and Conceição dos Ouros, Espírito Santo do Pinhal plants, and Jambeiro plants in the part of components. So these are the products that I told you about. This is a product that I would say it's 95% local. This is totally localized. This is manufactured in Argentina. Brazil doesn't have competence in the electronics, and so what we see that's local, it's some plastics. All these electronic parts, we know that China is the greatest exporter in the world. This part, as Orlando mentioned, it's a part that's 100% local. We have volume to localize it. Some other items we could even supply here in Brazil, but some OEMs, either for strategies or not, they decided to bring the complete engine, and you can't supply in the market. It's a matter of scale that we don't need to, or we can't manufacture it in Brazil. And we have the DPSS that supplies all the items that Delphi produces in the auto market to support our portfolio. Well, Delphi in the world, the whole world, worldwide, has some 130,000 employees in South America. We have 7,000. We have about 130 manufacturing plants worldwide. So Delphi purchases where it consumes and it wants to produce. That's why we have 7 plants here to meet all the O&Ms and produce locally. That's Delphi's idea. Why? It's because you get more agility and reduce your inventories. You give more flexibility to your clients. So Delphi has that as a motto. So what's the strategy to do that? Delphi defined that it has for all categories, the categories that we could call RMVS, raw material, the electronics category, all and every category. Delphi has suppliers that we call category approved supplier list. That's what we call it, CASL. So we have people in the North America has that, Asia and Europe have that too. These suppliers that we call CASL, they are in the 3 regions of the world, and this is where this is our core supplier. What is it? It's the supplier that's going to bring a competitive advantage, and where Delphi is going to concentrate all the business volume. So more business, more it will give results for us and for other companies. So what do we ask this supplier? The excellence in quality, delivery. This supplier will have to have the best technology. It has to be competitive in terms of cost. It has to be financially stable. We're going through a brutal crisis here in Brazil. We lost 3 million vehicles. Many companies are going through bad times and financial difficulties. So we have to follow that. We have to help, and we have to have this structure to support all this. We have to agree the terms and conditions, which is nothing more than the agreements, the guarantees, and to give all the safety, the security that the chain needs. We have to have a strategy of footprint that meets globally, Delphi globally. We have to support diversity with the social initiatives and also seeking sustainability in terms of environmental health. We have to need to have a strong commitment with continuous improvement, ongoing improvement, and we have annual purchase value, which is a value that is relevant for them, for the supplier. We can give them an amount in terms of purchases that's important for them. Here we are already talking about the core. What's the core? It's the supplier that's going to group even further. It goes, Delphi now wants to concentrate more businesses with this supplier to make him grow even more. And then this supplier will have to provide all this, and mainly this engagement, leadership, engagement and relationships with Delphi. The idea is to have at least from 100 to 110 suppliers, strong suppliers at the global level. 130 manufacturing plants. We're talking about a purchasing volume which is public of the order of $10 billion. Well, what have we defined? After defining all this structure in South America, we defined a strategy, and we also have a metrics that all our suppliers must be located preferably no further than 24 hours away from our plant. Why that? Because we reduced inventories, we get transparency in our programming, we have a reaction power that's better. This is the metrics that we pursue. So when we have a new business and we invite a new supplier, if Delphi is opening a manufacturing plant in some city, we provide the suppliers all that. We tell them we are opening a manufacturing plant in Paraisópolis, for example. That's where we have our plant. We have all these places where you could be located. The benefits we have are these and those, and we would like you to be located in one of these places, and preferably the supplier has to be 24 hours away only from, at the most, from our business. As I said before, and I think Orlando also mentioned it, although you try to locate 100%, Brazil doesn't have the capability to offer 100% of the products. We always have to import something. And this import process, we also defined what are the strategic places, both in Europe and Asia, and all the regions, and how we can use the Delphi, the international Delphi network, to bring competitiveness, a competitive advantage. We don't work isolatedly. We work together with the other, with our other. The same load that's going to be collected to South America will go to Asia and Europe. So the same truck is optimized, and all this network is linked and synchronized, so that we have leverage with all the divisions, and we have a link of our domestic logistics with our international network. And with that, we manage to better occupy our containers and our trucks at the global level, and with that we eliminate the waste, and we also have support. This is for both for domestic market. We have all the divisions. Delphi, our logistic is centralized. It's not split up. All plants, they follow a model, be it Kanban or any other model that we have the logistics for collection. We all have to follow the same thing for all the divisions, so that we have competitive advantage, and we don't run the risk of sending one truck to one supplier and the other plant is also sending another truck to that same supplier. And we have decided 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, in several of the previous events that we participated in, how we protect this part of the chain that we cannot control, which are the imported components, how do we bring that into our competitive advantage? So Delphi decided to implement the blue line for all plants. The blue line I'll explain further. We have a green channel. We can work with the green channel directly from Sunday through Sunday. This brings predictability in our inventories, and we manage to see to our clients better. And when we import material, and we only pay for it when we sell it. So when we have a crisis like this, and you have some huge cuts in demand, you end up with materials in inventory, which has no taxes on, because you haven't disbursed any cash, and you can return it after 1 year without any honors. So what we wanted to bring something that would be a differential factor, and Ricoff is only 23 companies. The Ministry of Finances is bringing new standards in so that other companies can come into the Ricoff with the more agility and more facility, and this will bring to Brazil into all companies' advantages. I'll talk about the Ricoff a little bit. I would say that a company the size of Delphi, or companies which want to operate in the overseas trade, have to have Ricoff and Blue Line, because these are quality seals, this is compliance, and we end up by avoiding all the strikes. We have no strikes anymore, but we haven't had any problems at all. So what does Delphi, just to summarize for you, I'm going to show you some other slides. This slide here, it's nothing but the message that Delphi has been passing globally. We have the world that's changing. The journey has to give us results. We have to be quicker and quicker all the time, and we have no way out. And the world where we live is complex, is interdependent, and very fast. So what are the values? Power, opportunities, and responsibilities. The strategies is, so without knowledge, data, and vision, you'd get nowhere. And so the little things have to be, we must act in the small things, always in a very consistent manner. And with that, we manage to reach excellence. So in short, what I wanted to tell you, this is the strategy model. To have a link with all divisions, protect this overseas trade, to compete in this market that's more and more difficult and growingly difficult. And as Orlando says, as a message, we believe that 2016 is going to be a very difficult year, more than 2015, and maybe we will return to growth in 2017. And Delphi will accelerate all implementations, be it in improvements or strategy, to come back and strong in 2017. That's what I had for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Obrigado, Jansen. That was, I think, again, another very revealing presentation, taking you through some of the honest weaknesses and difficulties that we're seeing, and perhaps some of the strategies here in Brazil and globally to make the supply chain stronger. So I think you've got quite a good overview there from different manufacturers and different stages of developments and perspectives there. So we'd like to take We've got about 15 or so minutes. We'd like to open this up now for Q&A. You can pose your question in Portuguese or in English. As you've obviously noticed, we have the simultaneous translation, so don't be shy. I'll open it up to the floor first. Are there any questions from the audience? The usual applies. If you think you're getting out early because you're quiet, it's not going to happen. I've got plenty myself. So anyway, as you wake up, hopefully, feel free to put your hand up and raise a question. Maybe my first question is to Orlando, talking about localization here in Brazil. And you've outlined some of the strategies from Chery's point of view. Obviously, Chery has a big manufacturing footprint in China. So how does the total delivered cost compare for Brazil versus China? I mean, I would imagine in many ways that it would be simpler to continue to bring in a higher percentage from China, but obviously you're pushing to localize. So what is the kind of total delivery cost compare, and what strategies would you point out to increase localization even in this difficult time?
Dá para me ouvir falando aqui, né? Ok.
You can hear me when I speak from there, right? This is a very complex area, this localization issue, but what we can see today, what's making the localization feasible despite of the high dollar exchange rate, we have to have a level of localization, and this makes a difference with to do with the imports and taxes. This is the greatest steering wheel of our nationalization. In the market like we have today, we want to nationalize, but we also want to invest as little as possible because we have already made a huge investment that didn't bring us any return. So we want to nationalize, but we're going through the nationalization now of smaller items with the level of investment as little as possible. So we're seeking to prioritize those elements that have a low investment levels, and we have all the process of certification, all the tests that must be made. But basically, that's our strategy, seeking as little investment as possible at the moment. Obrigada.
From your perspective, obviously you've outlined obviously Delphi is a very global company, and you have global operations, of course, supplying global platforms. So again, I mean, how specifically localized is Delphi in Brazil, and are you also, how challenging is it for you to increase these levels now?
What we are discussing internally, that is that unfortunately the dollar at 4 reais 5 years ago, it was feasible to localize because you could offset that with labor. Since the labor costs have grown over inflation, and you have no competitiveness now to localize it with the dollar at 4 reais. It's very difficult to make a business case feasible, invest in tools. But what we're discussing internally is to make Brazil become an export pole and improve this localization rate. Our localization rate is relatively high, but what we need here in Brazil is to make feasible or localize to be able to meet the demand of the local market, domestic market, but also to reach exports. So that's what we're proposing for our directors. They're assessing it, but I would say that's the only way out for Brazil today. Talking about today's several studies are being made. As I said, we are launching 2 other models, one this year and another one next year. And it's impressive with this economical situation that with the high dollar rate that should favor this launching of a new model, nationalized model Even if you nationalize and do all this strategy of producing locally, even with the import rates, it's becoming almost unfavorable to produce here. The imported products, even when you pay all the import rates, the imported product ends up by arriving here with more competitive costs, especially in the scenario that Cheryl is now living here in Brazil. So it's very difficult to make it feasible. Obrigado por
The audience at this time. We have a question right here in the front, and then we'll go there. We'll start here in the front. And when you get the mic, if you can just say your name and company, please.
Bom dia.
Good morning. My name is Alex. I'm from Ilda Globis. My question goes to Jansen. You talked about Inovar Auto. Do you believe that this government's program, it really favors the growth of technology of Brazil for suppliers that are willing to develop technology here in Brazil? But you see suppliers installing themselves in Brazil, but we always with the basic technology, with simple parts, and the actual development is really imported. So does Inovar take care of that? Inovar at the beginning, the idea was very good to try to encourage localization and competences of some equipment that would bring advantages for in terms of technology in Brazil. But the way it was done, it was made, it didn't bring the results that we expected. We don't perceive with the auto parts any growth at all. It was the government's program. Now we will have Inovar Auto 2, or with another name that will take the chain as a whole, because the Inovar Auto only included the OEMs, but you can localize some parts with technology. Brazil doesn't have technology. Brazil missed out on 10 years. The average age of the machinery in Brazil is about 20 years old. When we talk about Germany, for example, you talk 5 years. So we, with the low dollar, we were buying from abroad, and we forgot to invest in technology in Brazil, and you have no way to be competitive.
Yes, I've also heard about the Inovar too. Can I ask one more question? Jansen, for you as well. Considering the scenario of the dollar close to 4, you mentioned about suppliers and exports. Wouldn't this be the moment to focus on the local suppliers to export to plants outside Brazil, since you would have a more competitive product? Yes, sure, that's the idea. It's 6 months that we've been working on this and trying to find out where we are competitive. The problem is that when you discuss this, you have other areas where you say, well, why am I not going to produce here to buy from you in Brazil? So you have to prove that you're more competitive. And Brazil has some items where we are competitive. For example, injected, those where you have intensive capital. Brazil is competitive with the dollar at 4. When you have intensive labor, there's no way to be competitive. And that is exactly what we're doing. We're mapping some suppliers, and the idea is to use their channel to supply the external market. That is what was done way back. Since we had a heated up internal market, we ended up by privileging the internal market and forgetting exports. That was the classic mistake, because for you to gain the market, it's outside, it's very difficult. Now there are companies with an adequate strategy, which is a balance between the external and the internal market, and that is what we're looking for.
Bom dia, meu nome é Antônio.
I'm Antonio Carlos. I'm from Mercedes-Benz. I'm the president of the of a Brazilian Association of Surface Treatment, Inovar Auto, has a good idea, but it never worked. So the question is for Orlando, with this capacity that you have and the plant that you built, it really seems to be a really cool plant, well put together. Are you going to produce cars for other companies? This possibility is not closed. We've received some visits from some groups that are associated to Chery in China. If you know, in China, any international companies that wants to establish themselves there, you have to have a joint venture. So there are some joint ventures, and this possibility there's nothing concrete, but yes, this possibility does exist, especially in the part of painting. We have a modern system and it's very subutilized. So just to complete this part, I think Inovar was a program that was done in Brazil by the government and also by the companies that were established here, and this project was made to bar some competitors and to protect Brazil a little bit. So it would even be better if Brazil didn't have to protect itself so much. If we had an agile, modern economy where investments would come naturally, production costs, development costs, and the investments in technology would be lower. So Brazil would be competitive without this protection. It ends up by being necessary, but it generates additional costs, a whole set of bureaucracies. We always complicate things. It would be much simpler to be open to the world, and Inovar might even be generating problems in the international trade, and also a lot of indefinition.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other question from the floor?
Tem alguma outra pergunta?
We're focusing quite a bit on suppliers and sort of localization. I wanted to ask you both a bit about how you outsource your logistics. So what sort of model do you use? Do you have lead logistics providers overseeing large parts of the supply chain, or do you source more by carrier, etc.? Maybe if you can just outline a little bit for us. Start with Orlando and then also from Jansen as well.
Em Chery, na Chery nós temos.
In Chery, we have some partners. Stefan is here. We have internal logistics partners, supply line, all sort of peripheral partnerships are done by BMS or other. In the outbound part, we also have a traditional partner here in Brazil, which is Brazil. So they're even putting together a structure in the industrial park that I talked about. So all this outbound part, as from the moment that the truck comes into our patio, they unload, they do the PDI, and then this is taken together with all the other plants. The leg that still hasn't been implemented is exactly the inbound leg. Since our movement is low, and in the beginning this is normal, you start with transport done by the suppliers themselves, delivering CFE. So we're planning to change this, but first of all we have to get out of this crisis a little bit. We have to grow. We have to have a critical mass of volume so that this milk run can be feasible in a modern way. I would say that internationally, I think that we're extremely well using all the global suppliers. So those who are stronger in one area is working with us, and I would say that we have a good logistics here in the local market. I think what we're trying to do now is to advance a bit with the suppliers. We want to bring the suppliers closer to our plant. I mentioned in 24 hours, but we want to give more transparency in the programming part so that they can be quicker. So I see opportunities, even though we have a lot of packaging which is reusable, but we still have a lot to do, and our logistical suppliers are helping us in this aspect.
Time for one further question, if there is one. If not, it'll come from me. Maybe, I mean, Orlando, you sort of maybe touched on this a little bit when you talked about the complexities around the protection versus the open trading in Brazil, but maybe more specifically, what do you think the government should be doing now in Brazil to support the industry or during this time? I mean, we know this Innovar 2 is coming, but are there other things that we should be doing, whether it's closer collaboration or communication around different policies, whether it's an incentive scheme, whatever? From your view, what do you think might the government do now?
Hoje em dia é pouco difícil falar o que a gente pensa que o governo.
Today it's very difficult to say what we think the government will do or won't do, but I think that that we should have continued making the industry feasible, decrease the bureaucratic barriers, the taxes that we have. It's very difficult. You have a company, because of the market, they're going through difficult times where you have tight cash flow, where you have controlled investments, and then all of a sudden you come across situations which are hilarious. You get, for example, IBAMA, which is an environmental agency that comes with ridiculous requirements. Now, for the mechanical place that of there on the corner, do they have the same requirements? That they ask for ridiculously expensive tests that doesn't have any logic behind it. So Brazil's an extremely regulated country, and it becomes more and more difficult every day. People become absolutely frightened with some demands that are made that impact the business. The foreign groups, the large foreign groups, have problems, and the small ones have problems to survive with our reality. So we have to rethink all this ridiculous bureaucracy, all this that really hinders us. That would be my initial point, if I could suggest something to the government. Well, I think Brazil has lost its timing. We have had no investments in infrastructure, no investment in airports, or low investment in airports. We did something for the World Cup, but in this part of logistics, Brazil is really not doing what it should and has to invest. I think Brazil knows what has to be done. Tax and labor reforms, I think that is necessary. Brazil has a huge market. A social pact is necessary. People that come from the outside, how can you be in a crisis with a country with this dimension, with all these natural resources that you have, and Brazil just doesn't move on? It's an internal crisis, but we have to have a tax and a labor reform. Without this, I think Brazil's going to continue skating and slipping, but it won't have an economy market that can compete with the largest countries in the world. We have to have something like that.
Okay, thank you. I want to take this time to thank both of our speakers. I think they provided a lot of really interesting information and data about their companies. So thank you for that. We're going to actually postpone that voting I mentioned early on to the last session, so stay with us. But if you do have time to log in to the live stream, I encourage you to do it, because you get, like I said, there's some features on there which can be beneficial to you during the event. But we'll return to that a little bit later in the day. I'd like you now to all join us for coffee, hosted by Jeffco. And we'll be back here.